Hello there guys and welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week is a two-parter I've obviously put onto YouTube in the full video version with Ben of Star Wars Timeline. Now, make sure you check out the show notes for further details on things, but in essence, the first half of the conversation, we talk about Ben's Russian culture, his early life, we talk about monomyths and animation and those sort of things as well. Then from around the halfway-ish part, we start talking about Dune a little bit. There are some very light spoilers for the recent movie Dune, but nothing major. I think you can still easily enjoy the movie if you have listened to this podcast and not checked out Dune. And then the last sort of 40 minutes or so of the conversation, we speak about Star Wars quite extensively, because obviously with Ben's channel name, Star Wars Timeline, we both have a massive passion for Star Wars. So really, the best place to check out things is just the show notes. I've got information on Ben's YouTube channel, his Star Wars Facebook group, his Twitter account, as well as a lot of the other sort of guest spots I've been doing in recent years. And then there's also a link to my Patreon and a few other bits and pieces there. So I don't want to ramble on here too much. I want to kind of get going so you guys can listen to this amazing conversation. But yeah, that's basically what we're looking at. So I hope you guys enjoy this conversation. Please make sure that you subscribe to Ben's YouTube channel, as well as mine, obviously. I would really appreciate that. And it will be a Christmas miracle, even though this is coming out the day after Christmas. But still, thank you guys so much for listening. As always, I appreciate all of you listening. I will not be back at the end with an outro thing. That's the video versions. I can't be bothered to do that. And apologies, my hair looks like a weird mess, and I'm all shiny because I've got lots of cream on and things, because I have eczema and I have to put oil on my skin every day. So that's exciting too. But hope you guys all have a great end to 2021. And obviously, I'll speak to you guys in 2022 with a huge amount of things I've got going on. And if anyone did want to become a Patreon supporter and get loads of additional content, including quite a few things that are going to be dropping over Christmas, then that would be massively appreciated. But, you know, rate, review, share with your friends, all that sort of other jazz. But thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it. And here we are. So I am joined today with my good friend Ben, and this is probably the first time that I've had a guest on the show that I've been on their show so many more times than they've been on mine. Normally people come on my show like once or twice and then I'll go on their show and things, but I've been on your show 4 times already. I mean, 3 of them were like weeks after each other and things. So why don't you tell everyone how it is that we kind of got to know each other, because what it is the kind of content you create.
Mm-hmm. First of all, Mike, thank you very much for having me. I feel honored and I feel completely relaxed. Now I don't have to put in any work. I just have to answer questions. That's got to be exciting, right? My name is Ben, and I started the Star Wars Timeline channel because I came across people on social media asking questions. Hey, where to start in the books? Where to start reading? So I'm like, okay, let me start answering that. Put all my creative juices into this channel. I started Facebook group, Star Wars Timeline, thinking I will just drop my videos there and nobody will come to watch them. And they're kind of like a community snowballed out of there. And very lately, I questioned myself, should I jump onto it or not? I know what kind of, stigma it has, and Star Wars, _ channel, threw it in there, Star Wars Timeline, just throw all my content in there. And I started receiving this response. I'm like, okay. And then I don't actually exactly remember how you and I started conversing. I think it was one of the Facebook groups it could have been.
I think
right?
It was,
I saw
yeah.
a comment or two, and I always enjoy sharing thoughts and opinions with people, especially those who disagree with me. Like, hey, why do you think this way? Why do you think that way? And our shared love and passion for Star Wars, that's what it started,
Yeah, I think it was the Facebook groups and things. But yeah, your channel, Star Wars Timeline, I love it because you've got the shorter episode or the shorter videos and things that you just do sort of like mini deep dives on species or planets or characters and things, which I do thoroughly enjoy. And then you've also got the longer form ones, which you've been doing more recently with speaking with other individuals and whatnot. But if we like roll it all the way back to sort of your early life, you were not born in the United States, which is where you're currently residing. So would you like to tell us sort of where you originally were from and why you decided to move to America, in essence?
Yeah, so I kind of traveled, right? I was born on the last wave of Soviet Union, right? 1981, I was born in a republic called Moldova, which is now an independent, free government, but it was like part of Soviet Union, and people speak kind of like Russian and Roman in there. From there, I was like 4 or 5. I moved to Caucasus, south of Russia, between the Black and Caspian Sea. Spent most of my teenage years. And then when I was 14, we moved to New York. And basically, that's what I've stayed most of my life. If somebody told me at 14 that I would come abroad and live in a different country and speak in a different language, I would have laughed. I'm like, come on, man, what are you saying? The first thing I remember coming to New York, the biggest like sort of phobia and question was, will I ever be able to speak like consistent English, like string sentences together and formulate thoughts? It was the biggest scare. Even though like we studied English, the Queen's British, or what you call the proper English in Russia. You come here, nobody studied it. Nobody's like, oh, we're not going to use it, you know? So you come here, you have to start from the beginning, the past, present, future times, the verb to be, and all that stuff. Like it was pretty nightmarish. But yeah, we moved because the climate was quite uneasy in Russia in that time. Post, the fall, collapse of Soviet Union, 1991, it was like complete chaos. People privatizing sectors and people taking the wealth of Russia and just like putting it to offshore accounts, just robbing, the country blind. And the south of Russia was like, there was a lot of crime, and my family had a business, and my grandfather just said, you know what, I can't. I don't want my grandchildren experiencing all of this mess. Let's move. Actually, my great-grand-uncle, who was a Soviet-era popular actor, who moved to the United States, to New York, decades earlier, he actually got to star in one of the films with Robin Williams, Moscow on Hudson. He plays Robin Williams' crazy old man. And he was inviting us over. Many, many years, he said, like, he was my grandfather's brother, actually. He was saying, come over, come to New York. It's such a vibrant city. You will love it here. There's, there's culture. There's Russians here. Come over. So that was sort of the decision. My family was kind of like weighing our options. And then just we one day picked our bags and left.
Wow. Yeah. That's really cool. And you say that, obviously, with learning English and things, that was tasking. Did you, how many languages do you speak? How many languages do you speak, basically?
Russian, English, and I speak a tiny bit of Farsi. Farsi is a Mediterranean language, which a lot of cultures speak, primarily Iranians. This is where my roots are. So I'm, so to speak, a Caucasian Jew, or Sephardic Jew, or you could say Iranian Jew. That's my roots, dating back 3,000 years ago. My parents speak it fluently. We don't have a writing system because the language is actually very, very old. It's older than modern Iranian language, I'm sorry. And so we only have verbal traditions and verbal language. So my parents are fluent in that. I'm like, okay, I can understand a little bit over here and over there, but generally it's just Russian and English.
And coming over, I'm not over there. I'm not based in the US, but going over there at that age to learn English. I mean, your English is, fluent at the moment. Well, so was that, you mentioned it was kind of difficult. Was it difficult for you to acclimatize? Because 14 is quite late. Like if you were like 6 years old or something and you came over, by the time you were 14, it wouldn't have been a second thought. So how was that sort of the early years of you growing up in the US, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, sure. The contrast is actually, I have a younger brother, Joe, right? He has his own YouTube channel, like heavy metal and all that stuff. So we're 6 years apart. He was 8, I was 14. And frankly, the contrast between the two wasn't that different. Because when you're 14, you pick up information a lot quicker than, let's say, when you were like 20 or 30, right? So it was still, first half a year for myself and for him, it was like you are in this cultural bubble that you're in. You don't speak the language, you don't understand the culture. We couldn't imagine what New York would be like. Because obviously, all the kids in the world at that time grew with Hollywood cinema. Right, from Breakfast Club to Indiana Jones to Back to the Future. We saw a romanticized, this magical version of the United States through cinema. And that's all the access we had. Unless, of course, it was like a documentary on TV. But even that was just a small glimpse. When you come here, it's not just the language barrier, it's culture shock. And I remember for a very long time, I used to sit... I went to this huge school called John F. Kennedy High School in the Bronx. It's primarily, the kids were demographically Hispanic kids, Latino kids, Black kids, and only 6 students of like 6,000 student school. And you would sit silently in the classroom and just not say a word because it was just like that kind of barrier. I'm like, I don't know what to say. I don't want to sound stupid and inaccurate. I remember one day some Spanish kid turned over and he looked at me over the shoulders like this big guy. He said, "Hey, Ben, are you okay? Is someone bothering me? Like, you're so quiet all the time. What is your problem?" Sorry, guys. This is New York saying hello. Michael and I, we constantly hear this during my podcast, my recordings. It's sort of kind of like a familiarity, but sorry, we now introduced the sound to your podcast as well.
The tradition continues.
Right, tradition continues. And this boy, he asked me like, "Hey, Ben, what is the problem? You okay?" And I told him, "English is my problem." It was so scared to speak up. He's like, "Don't worry, man, you'll get this." So and after slowly, obviously, half a year later, when you jump from the ESL classes into proper English and you start learning math and you start learning history, it snowballs, it picks up. I used a lot of diversions outside of school to pick up on English. Like I would translate my favorite heavy metal lyrics, which I grew up with in Russia, like Metallica. Like, yeah, you love the music, but you don't know the lyrics. I'm like, okay, now I live in this country. It's the perfect opportunity to learn. And comic books was also my huge window into understanding language because they're bubbles. That's all you have to pick up. It's not intimidating at all. You sit side by side with a dictionary, right? This is before Google Translate. Before online dictionaries, you would just sit with a physical translator in your comic book and you're like, okay, let's figure this thing out.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, that's a good amount of dedication for your sort of the roots of being, a nerd in all the best ways. Obviously, I mean, in the background, there's even a Lego Millennium Falcon. So, that's how we got connected. But with, so if we move on a small amount, because there's a few bits of information that I know about you that our listeners definitely won't know, but even people who listen to your channel, I'm not sure if you've told them about it on your channel, but you're sort of, actually, I think you might have done a podcast or two about your past of being an animator, in essence. And I want to ask sort of being in that field, how you got into that, and did that come from your love of sort of anime and that sort of thing, or was it kind of the reverse?
First of all, I would like to make a small confession. I think I've made it in one of my podcasts. I'm now publicly announcing it here. I kind of cheat. I say that I'm an animator because I have a degree in animation, right?
I mean,
I studied 4 years. I have a degree. I insist. I have a degree in animation. I never pursued it as a career because by my final year graduating from School of Visual Arts here in New York, I realized there has to be a balance between workload and you enjoying it. If workload outweighs your love or passion for something and your heart is not in it, you can't call yourself that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when I studied, and I'll speak up to how I got into animation, but my final year, I took courses like the art history, and I took classes in mythology, and I took classes in 3D Mayan modeling. And being such a huge video gamer, I knew that I kind of picked the wrong direction. I should have been a 3D model or a 3D animator. That would have been my thing. I would totally dedicate myself to that, but alas, it was too late. But how I got into it is, once again, I told you that most of the kids grew up with Hollywood cinema and obviously Disney. And in Russia, mid 80s, early 90s was already a lot more lax. And the government allowed influx of Western cinema. They was like, okay, let the kids watch it. Even though it wasn't entirely legal, you would have some films which came out in theaters and you would see the posters and go see them. But primarily we got everything through pirated VHS tapes. That's how I saw Star Wars. That's how I saw Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, Terminator, RoboCop, all these movies, right? And gathering my thoughts. Your question was?
It was about why you pursued the career of animation.
Right, because I pursued...
degree.
Right, we were on Disney, sorry.
Yeah.
And obviously a huge part of the childhood was Disney. Partially it was their animated series that were on television, like, DuckTales and Chip and Dale and all of that stuff, but also the animated films, Pocahontas, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, Aladdin. When I saw that, I'm like, and I used to draw them in my little sketchbook. I always dreamed that I would work for Disney one day. That would be this great. And we also had a very immense tradition and library of Russian animation, which is known throughout the world as some of the most amazing animation ever produced. And I said, I want to work for Disney someday. So we came here, and the way that I got specifically in that school and got a degree in animation, somebody at my public college, the Lehman College that I went to, my art teacher said, well, Ben, there is this School of Visual Arts. If you like animation, you should go there. And I went there. I had an interview, and the lady, not maliciously so, but she sort of laughed at me. She saw my little scribble. She said, Ben, you realize this is one of the best schools on the eastern coast of the U.S., like art schools. Only special gifted kids get here. Like what you brought here, it's just scribbles. You don't even have a portfolio. I got up. I was so fumed. I went to the interview by myself. I was 18 years old. My parents were not present. You're like, feel a little bit vulnerable and insecure. And I stood up. I got so fumed. I looked at her. I said, "Lady, expect me in the school next year." So I left. I picked up my scribbles, and the same professor who suggested the school to me, she helped me build my portfolio, for which I'm forever grateful. So I came back next year, all my portfolio done, and I went to the school based on the principle that I will do the impossible. You told me no, but I will get in the school and I will study animation.
Amazing.
So that was impulse. The encouragement, the inspiration, aside from Disney and Russian film, was also anime, which we had very little access to in a small town that I grew up in. But the two biggest things were Guyver, and it was one early Miyazaki film, which I forget what it was. It was an earlier Miyazaki film. It's fully animated, and we did understand that it was Japanese. It was specifically a type of animation, but I didn't realize it was this anime genre. I just knew it was a Japanese cartoon.
And out of interest, what kind of since then, what other anime do you like? Because I know you like a few.
So once I came here, I started working in a comic book shop right across my street called Bulletproof Comics for many years. And the way that I got into working there was this Korean gentleman who owned it, Steven Chow, who had a bunch of comic books and video games that he sold there. And I came through one time and he had a collection of anime. And DVD was coming in hot in the United States because PlayStation 2 was the cheapest DVD player that you could play. So it's kind of like a gaming culture clashing with anime culture together in one, because all the video game kids in New York, at least the kids that I talked to who played PlayStation 2 video games, they wanted to jump on this new, beautiful, crispy, high definition way of looking at anime, right? Mm-hmm. And I started talking to this owner, and he was like, "Ben, you have to see the original Vampire Hunter D." Boom.
Oh, I love that. I've got that on DVD.
Right? You have to see Akira. Boom. You have to see the original Ghost in the Shell. Boom. Mm-hmm. It's like he started barraging me with all this stuff. Escaflowne, Outlaw Star, Cowboy Bebop. It's like, of course, Naruto was already making its headway into the States. It was only available on VHS. Naruto. So many animes of that late 80s, early 90s, and mid 90s is where it thrived. And then by 2000s, I kind of like got out of it because it got populated by this, lolicon, waifu, kind of like big-breasted women kind of thing. I was like, it's not for me. Berserk obviously was a huge one.
Yeah, because I've seen a fair amount of anime, but not like a huge amount. Maybe more than the average person, but definitely not as much as some of my friends and things. I used to watch Dragon Ball lots. I've seen all of Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Kai, lots of the films, and then I've seen bits of Super, and then I saw like a lot of Pokemon, Digimon, Vampire Hunter D, Fist of the North Star, and that sort of thing. And then I've seen like some Studio Ghibli sort of films, Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, a couple of those.
Those are the heavy ones, the big ones.
Yeah. And there's a few others. I've seen Ghost in the Shell. I've got Akira on Blu-ray. I haven't watched it yet though. It was a gift from a friend of mine this year, so I do need to get in on that as well. But yeah, I mean, animation is so diverse, and I whenever people say, "Oh, I just don't like cartoons," I'm just like, but I know there are probably people who listen to this podcast who may have that opinion, and that's fine. But I'm always just a bit like, but that's such a broad brush of like the variation you can have from something like, SpongeBob to South Park to Rick and Morty to then, Star Wars, Clone Wars, which is animated. It's just 3D models as opposed to 2D animated and things. And it's just like those kind of, the variety there in itself is completely different. So out of interest with those, do you have like a favorite type of animation style? Is it the Russian sort of ones that you saw in your youth, or is there another one that's quite a contender?
No, because I was equally exposed to everything, I don't play favorites. I never have. Whether it's American animation or you look at something like Soviet era 60s and 70s animation, a lot of Russian filmmakers did adaptations of world classics. Whether it's like Hans Christian Andersen, or they collaborate a lot with Japanese filmmakers. Akira Kurosawa came over and he directed Russian films as well. So as far as animation is concerned, when you're, picture a box of candy. It's all candy. It doesn't matter. Like you pick a chocolate and then you get this one and that one. It doesn't matter. And between anime or whether it's a claymation or whether it's something experimental and intended for adults. Like for example, there's one famous Russian animated film which is done entirely with a box of matches.
Wow.
That's all it is. It's a commentary on war. and it's animated. He takes each individual match piece and he parades them as soldiers and he tells a story with them. He brings character to a piece of matches. It's a very highly experimental film. But when you watch something like that and you move to something like claymation, where each claymation piece is actually woven out of fabric, right? And then you move to something that's made out of clay or wire. Like it's you can't go back from that. I guess that's one thing that, generally when you talk to younger people, especially like the millennial generation, they hear Soviet Union or communism or Soviet regime, they think that they were with these narrow-minded, tunnel vision kind of kids. We had a very, very broad education in terms of school and in terms of cultural influences from around the world. And art and animation was a huge part of it. We saw a lot of Western animation. Who didn't grow up with Tom and Jerry? That's culture. Those animated films won Oscars, right? The one where Miles goes to New York, I think. Remember the one with the Jerry? It's an episode featuring only him, and he goes to the big city, and you experience New York through him. That's culture. That's art. And when you experience all of it, like I never distinguished. I never knew the difference. It was all a world of animation to me.
Yeah, it's a very good way of putting it. Like I feel similarly with animation. Like, for example, Spirited Away has some of my favourite hand-drawn animation, if not my favourite ever. But then I love some of the over-top elements that come with like Dragon Ball Z and things, when they're like, powering up and things, and everything around them is cracking, and you've got all these sort of layers of it and things. And then you get sort of, stop motion things. Like one of my favourite films is Isle of Dogs, and another one is Coraline, and both of those are stop motion by different directors. But like those top contenders for me of maybe that genre don't compare to each other. It's kind of like, what's your favorite? Do you like your favorite comedy film more than your favorite sci-fi film? And it's like, well, they're two quite different mediums, and they're quite different feels to them. And with animation, there's just such a wide scope and variety. And as you say, it's so connected with the culture, is that most nations across the world have their own sort of variant. I mean, even, obviously Americans have got their standard sort of cartoon, but even they've got elements which are more similar to anime, such as like Avatar.
Yeah. But even, within one culture, you have experimental artists who do different things. And as far as aesthetic goes, the only thing when I became older and more critical, obviously, and, when you have that film education and animation, and you're taught by top professors in the country, you kind of like start shaping and focusing on things and sharpening your taste and things that you're looking for. The only thing that I started questioning is animation that looks so realistic that it could have been done in film. Because if it can be done in film, to me, it's no longer animation. It has no purpose or reason to be in animation. For example, there was a wonderful, wonderful Japanese film that came out, I want to say early 2000s, called Jinro, The Wolf Brigade.
Right.
It's a fantastic dystopian futuristic film where what if the Nazi Germany had won and Japan had adapted that kind of rulership of neo-nationalism. And this young man who works for this military government faction that enforces law upon citizens. It's a beautiful film. It has a fantastic script. It has a fantastic story. But it's so realistic looking that it's none of the spark, none of the imaginative visual charm that makes animation what it is present in it. It's almost done as a feature film that didn't have the budget to be live action. And that's why they decided to go with animation. And from that perspective, you can respect it. But as an animator, I felt that it didn't exploit the medium to its full extent. And if you were to ask me, Ben, what do you generally love? Do you have a particular style or thing that you look for? I love my animation that is removed from reality. I love my animation that it could have some grounded things in it. Like, for example, Star Wars Visions, which I'm sure we'll talk about, the first episode, The Duel, where the duel itself is very grounded. But when you look at the characters and then when they move outside of combat and the way that they look and how things animate in the background, it's very stylized. And that's what I enjoy in general.
That's a good point. I love that episode of The Duel as well. We'll get on to Star Wars shortly, because once we get off on that, I don't think we'll get off that subject at all, because I know what we both like. So if we speak about something that's sort of, I've got one more thing before I want to talk about Dune in a minute, but I want to ask you one more thing before that, which is you mentioned slightly earlier with your college studies and things, and that was mythology, because I know that you use in a lot of your YouTube videos and things, and when you speak about Star Wars and things, one of the things I really enjoy hearing about is when you talk about its comparison to mythology and sort of the not necessarily tropes, but retelling of ideas and stories and journeys that have appeared previously in mythology, like the fallen hero, but then also the journey and things. So, what got you? How? What made you go into that path? Because so many people watch movies and TV series and films and don't go into mythology.
Right.
What kind of got that intrigue fired up in you?
I suspect that a lot of modern audience who are glued to Hollywood and don't look outside of Hollywood or world cinema, I don't want to say nobody is ignorant. Everybody comes with a very specific worldview. And I suspect that a lot of that audience subconsciously still understands those elements in the storytelling. But how I came into it is historically, Russia and Greece have been two nations that were interconnected. Obviously, Russian language has the Cyrillic letters and a lot of words from Greek language. And because of all of both countries predominantly share the same religious practices, we always were like this tight. And the kids, my generation, I won't speak up for my father's generation or earlier, but my generation, kids in the 80s, we grew up reading Greek mythology books, watching adaptations of Russian animated films, which are done about the Greek heroic figures like Hercules, Jason and the Argonauts, the different, pieces dedicated to certain gods and nymphs and so forth. So it was in my vocabulary since childhood. Here's Russian folklore, right? The Slavic folklore, and here is the Greek culture and Greek myth. I always grew with each one side by side. So, and watching all of these mythology films or fantasy films or folk tales, as we call them in Russia, which beautiful pieces made in the 60s and 70s, full feature live action films that we grew up with, which are also known around the world. They're translated in different languages. When you watch that as a kid and you absorb it and it's part of your language, and then you go into Star Wars and you start learning the history of it, right? And DNA and what factors in. Here's John Williams over here and Ralph McQuarrie over there. Oh, who is Joseph Campbell? And from that point forward, once I discovered, obviously, Joseph Campbell and his theory of monomyth, it wasn't a grand discovery for me. It was tying everything into one package for me. As a kid who was always interested in folklore from Japanese culture, we had, again, Russian animated films made about the Japanese folklore, Chinese folklore, or West European or Scandinavian tales like the Frost Witch, or how do you call her, the Ice Queen or Frost Witch, something like that, right? Scandinavian tales, that too. And to me, discovering Joseph Campbell made me take a deeper dive into it. It was like, okay, I knew this stuff kind of on the periphery, on the surface. Now I want to learn more.
And when you elaborate on with Joseph Campbell, what his primary theory was, what you were just speaking about for our audience.
Right. So there's this wonderful documentary that you can go and see based on his conversations, right? I think they were filmed at Lucas Ranch during his last years before he passed away, because George Lucas considered him his mentor and his friend, right? And Joseph Campbell makes a lot of commentaries on themes in Star Wars after the movies were released. But basically his concept of monomyth is the idea that all cultures, all the primitive cultures of the world share a common thread. They all have mythology, folklore as a part of their religious, spiritual traditions. And all of those myths are based on the idea of symbology, which comes from the subconscious, right? Jung and Nietzsche, obviously, he refers to those as well. But generally, he's saying I don't think there's a more definitive scholar on world mythology than Joseph Campbell. He's got renowned for his work during the 60s. And to this day, you go to any bookstore and his book of A Hero with a Thousand Faces will be there sitting on the shelf. It's the definitive work on world mythology. And, it's such a hopeful and encouraging thought that we're all united, something that comes from our psyche, from somewhere buried deep underneath. Why the ancients were worshiping the sun at one point, why later on we had Christ-like figures, right? The resurrection of the holy man who will basically bring enlightenment to the world, was the idea which started actually way, way before Christianity, right? One of the first resurrected figures is in Egyptian mythology, their folklore. And the deeper you go, the more you start unraveling the thread of what connects the world and what makes even the modern mind tick. because we're surrounded by technology. We're surrounded by all these things. People saying, well, I want to be pragmatic. I want to believe in things that I see and hear. But there's also this deeply layered component to us as humans. And the more you study myth, the more you study Star Wars, the more you understand heroic motifs, the more I feel you go back into yourself and you learn about yourself.
Yeah, it is an intriguing. It makes you introspective in certain ways, and once you kind of see the patterns in a lot of humans, then it becomes easier in certain ways to recognize patterns within yourself as well. You know, it's one of those things I've spoken about on this podcast many a times, but my dad passed away when I was 19, and I've said that it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me, but it's the best thing that ever happened to my character, because something like that made me have to sort of reevaluate what things about him I liked, what I didn't, and then think about, well, why was he the way he was in this way? Why was he the way he was in that way? And I was like, oh, because of this. And then I was like, well, I've got that trait as well. So what about me caused that, and what can I do going forward to try and change that? And with mythology, and especially Star Wars, and they're still saying this today with like so many Star Wars content creators say this, where it's in short kind of trying to teach lessons in a way. The stories and the mythology, they're teaching you lessons about life by using parallels, but using much more extreme examples. With the Empire is obviously very much about sort of fascism and things like that, and it's the dark side of the Force, and you get these amazing powers, and you get to seemingly just do whatever you want to do, but it comes at a price. And there's doing the right thing isn't always easy. It's often actually harder to do, and you'll get beaten down, but if you persevere and you have your heart in the right place, you can get through it. And it's things like, you get children, the Marvel movies do it as well in a lot of ways. And it's like, you get these films where children or adults or anyone alike, you consume this content and it's satisfying to a deeper level in a lot of ways. And, the stories themselves, they're so important to the world that you kind of get immersed in as well.
I just want to add that also, to bring to what you're saying, is that there's a clear social function that a myth fulfills, right? It teaches the younger members of the society what is expected of them, how to behave and become the adults in this new world. But also it feels like in our modern world, it's substituting the biological need in us to worship, to realize that there's something greater than ourselves. And there's a religious aspect, there's a spiritual component to myth, where a lot of people who claim, like, look, I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual, I don't believe in God. That's all fine. I'm not neglecting that. But we have replaced our gods and heroes with something else. The most obvious, obviously, is Marvel and DC. It's a carbon copy of Scandinavian or Greek or Egyptian mythology transplanted onto modern times, right? Superman is basically Hercules. And all the myths are intertwined. And I think it's important to recognize that each myth has both. It can be a social function, and religious function. Like Hercules would have his own temple and worshippers and sect in one part of Greece, right? But he's also a hero of a tale that you relate to a child, and you say, if you want to grow big and strong like Hercules and be brave and walk through life with confidence, you need to emulate this model. Here's this hero. If you don't want to be like Jason and the Argonauts, I always like to bring this example where in the beginning of his journey, he's this heroic young man who takes his rightful place and earns back his throne. But later on, he becomes a villain of his own kingdom. And also for a young man to see that transformation, that heroes never stay the same, right? I'm pretty sure we'll touch upon Luke in The Last Jedi. Another excellent example. It's also such a vital aspect of realizing that heroes change, and we must observe our growth through life and make sure we don't fall into the same pitfalls.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things as well, if you just tell a kid, don't be bad, they'll just be like, what?
Yeah.
What? Don't be bad or bad things will happen to you. Like, what? But then if you show them a thing where, like with, using Star Wars as an example, it's like, look, if you do something really nice and you're really good of heart, you could have magic powers. You're not literally telling a child that and lying to them, but it's that kind of belief where, in a sense, one of the reasons I like characters like Leia, especially when she's older, is that sort of more grounded view on things. And like you can't go around doing all these crazy things all the time and everything working out. You have to think about things. You have to, it's what she says to Poe in Last Jedi. You can't just jump in something and blow something up. You can't just go and be brash and do these silly things. You have to stop and think and reevaluate things, and not everything's how it seems. And learning to think in that way doesn't necessarily come from someone telling you to think in that way. It comes from children, obviously, the way they learn things up till, well, people are always learning, but especially children, they're absorbing all their environment and how to be a person. And when they witness, family and friends nearby doing stuff, that's a huge factor. But also, kids always emulate stuff you watch. The impressions of, they want to dress up like them, they want to be this character. And if in your childhood you want to be certain characters and things, the elements of them that you like, you can kind of somewhat want to have elements like that in yourself. Like, I was always like that with Obi-Wan. I was always, from the original trilogy and the sequel, original trilogy and the prequels, he was always my favorite character ever. And I was always like, no matter what happened to him, he's had like one of the worst lives in Star Wars, and he keeps just trying to do the best thing. And it's things like that which I wanted to try and be. People should be more like Obi-Wan for the most part. That's not a bad slogan. There are a couple of minor issues he had with raising Anakin, but
it's a good thing, because you want to look. Civilization has certain expectations, and in order for it to fully function, you want to teach kids these practices which help them be functional and constructive, not destructive, right? If you have no laws and a young man grows up and he has no value to other people's lives and go take away stuff from you at a gunpoint, or worse, kill somebody, that works against civilization, not for it. And sometimes when people say, well, don't brainwash the kids, don't teach them this and that, somebody has a political agenda. Well, yes, there's always agenda, and the agenda of civilization is to survive and flourish, and not at the expense of its citizens, right? I should be able to thrive next to you, and we all should be happy and not at each other's throats, right? So you must teach a certain discipline to a kid, and that's what the function of mythology was.
I agree completely. And so moving on from that, let's talk about Dune a bit, because I haven't really spoken to anyone about Dune that much after I watched it a short while ago. And I will say, for guys here listening, there will be some minor spoilers, or maybe even major spoilers, I don't know, but to warn people, so you may want to skip ahead if you don't want to have anything about Dune spoiled for you. But, we'll try not to horrendously spoil everything immediately from the get-go, but it's got a lot of connections to Star Wars in the sense that it inspired Star Wars. The book, the original content, it inspired George Lucas. You can clearly see a lot of the elements of that. And I thought the film was really enjoyable. Like, out of interest, I assume you've seen the older film, the one from, was it the 80s?
Yes, I actually grew up with the older one, on, as I mentioned before, on a pirated tape with like cheap Russian single actor dubbing. I grew up with the original one.
So I've heard that it's a very different film. It's quite cheesy, and a lot of people really don't like it. Out of interest, how does it compare to the modern Dune, which obviously I've seen, but I haven't seen the old one?
I don't think they compare at all. I think they are completely different movies coming from a completely different creative center. As an adult, I could analyze and look at the older one, which granted, I haven't seen it in years. Last time I saw it maybe a couple of years back on the Blu-ray. But it feels like, to a modern viewer, it feels like a film that wanted to honor the book, and it's obviously created by people who worship the source material, but it feels like it falls into this kind of like industrial Hollywood machine of trying to make this mega blockbuster, having insane amount of money thrown at it, but at the same time not executing exactly its vision because of the interference from executive board. Right. People are under some sort of certain modern spell, like Star Wars fans, like modern filmmaking is all made in a community. That's how all Hollywood film has been made through the 30s, through the golden age of cinema. Yes, before you had a vision behind one artist, one director, and sometimes they would fight their battles and win and get the films done their way. But other times, investors would say, we want we want this actress to be cast who's popular, let's say in 30s and 40s, because she's going to sell more tickets. It's always this interplay between creativity and the practical aspect of it. And it feels like when you watch the original film, it's brought down by all of that inner struggles of the making of the film. So in the end, it works as this visually appealing, beautiful, masterfully done special effects at the time, which I believe still hold up to this day. I mean, when you look at the Arrakis, when you look at the worms come out, like the blue eyes, the suits, everything, when you look at it visually, it's there, it's on point. It has such a wonderful cast of actors that regardless of what you think about the execution of the film, you got to pay tribute to how these actors work in the film. I thought they all did a wonderful job. Whereas the new film is, I can't also call an 100% flawless book transplanted onto film screen. What Denis Villeneuve was very consciously aware of, and he decided to strategically approach is say, like, look, hold on a second. The book has this very spiritual, nuanced way, the way that it relates characters, that it relates scenery and psychology and spirituality, that it is impossible to capture on screen. And he said, so what do? Do I completely butcher the job and do my own version of it? Or do I proceed and create the best version of kind of like a cinematic commercial for the book? If that makes any sense. He said, let me throw all the imagery on screen juxtaposed with amazing cinematic score and actor play that will invite the audience to go and say, like, hey, I need to go to read the book now. Right. So basically, he's like having this bait in front of you, and he's waving it very expertly so, and saying, look, this is the best that this cinematic craft can perform, can do, and the rest is in the book. And I think on that score, I can't praise the movie more enough. He nailed it. I don't think anybody could have done a better job.
And do you think the book is it, I know you don't like saying if one is better or not than the other, but like, is the book, in some ways, it's got a lot more information, which is good, but can it be a bit overwhelming and too much, and the pacing's off? Like, how's the film and the book sort of compare, the newest film and the book?
So when I first started
I've not read the book, to clarify, sorry.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you and I spoke about it, and I was actually super excited to talk about this topic with you. So I first started reading the book last year, and I dropped maybe like 30% to it. I couldn't keep on with it. And I'll tell you why. Because obviously I was aware of the book for many, many years. And I wanted to read it because my reading list is so long. I'm like, oh man, come on, Ben. Like, the movie's about to come out. Don't slack off. Read the book now, right? So I jumped on it, and I was in the middle of other Star Wars books and stuff like this and doing my channel and everything like that. So I kind of abandoned it. Because my initial response was, it's a solid book, has a lot of things to say, but it's so mundane. It's like, not mundane. It's so... It's a sludge, man. It's like it's very slow paced in the beginning. It is very layered with setups, right? And a lot of the setups are not mechanical in a way that the story needs to function later on. A lot of the setup is psychology and spirituality, and it's not on the surface. It's you got to dig for it, but it's all there, I assure you. And so the first read was very slow. I put it down. I said, maybe I'm not in the mood. Maybe I'm not in the proper set of mind. And that's something that I would later on would love to talk to you about, maybe in my podcast, about the High Republic and where it's heading. But that's how I felt my first encounter with the book. I put it down. I was not impressed, to be honest with you. I just knew that I'm dealing with something that is a must read. It's almost like watching like a Clockwork Orange, right? Your famous British movie. That I felt that it's not something that I enjoyed watching, but is an absolute must-watch. It has an absolutely rightful place in the context of like, and cultural, the culture of cinema in general. It's a very important film to see, but is it enjoyable? Not for me. You don't watch it for entertainment value. You watch it because it's important. It has such a powerful message. It's oh my God, right? Same with this book. There's something layered in it that I must read. I must investigate. So this year I come into it and I say, well, all right, I'm in a different mindset now. My schedule is completely free. Here's this book in front of me. Let me read it now. And when I read it, I was completely blown away. It lived up to every expectation and hype that I was hearing surrounding the book. And I'm not going to say that it's better or worse than the movie. It's more nuanced. It has, I always felt that the way you experience story through the book, it can't be replicated. Not in audiobook, not in film. Different parts of your brain are engaged. You set up scenes differently. And especially if the author is an expert and he knows how to create text where he reveals only so much to the reader that the rest you have to sort of fulfill and fill all the gaps yourself. That's what makes an interesting reader. And then you have a billion questions you want to ask the author, and he'll never give you an answer. He'll say, well, it's up to you. Who am I to tell you how to interpret my story? That's what the Dune book is. And what the movie expertly does is not having tons of dialogue or overbearing with information. It gives you this amazing landscape, visual landscape, and a couple of key scenes that bind the story together, and a lot of stuff in between, which is not void. It's not empty. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Valhalla Rising, which was basically an exercise in beautiful cinematography. That's all it was. Matt Mikkelsen is in it, and the rest of the movie is just empty. It's about nothing. It was a waste of my time, right? So the Dune movie is polar opposite of that. It's filled with stuff. And if you want to question or ask what the stuff is, well, it's in the book. And I thought that Villeneuve was very conscious of doing that.
I see. Yeah, because I found that one of the things with the movie Dune that I found, because I'd not read the book, I've not seen the old film, I knew very little about it, really. I knew it had an influence on Star Wars, and I've listened to you talk about it on certain elements and things as well, and a couple of other friends of mine who read the books or saw the old film.
Yeah.
And I was very impressed by how much it was like Star Wars in the right ways, but how it still felt completely unique. I found that it could simultaneously fit in the Star Wars universe while also being a completely separate entity. Well, because their interpretation of, it's in Star Wars, it's the Force. In this, I can't remember what they call it, but it's
the voice.
The voice, and
right.
a lot of the if you just changed out characters in this movie to Star Wars characters, 90% of what happens is believable to happen on an isolated planet somewhere in the Star Wars universe. If you said, look, it was near the outer, where the Chiss are at the moment, there's some sort of weird space stuff going on. There's like this crazy black hole thing that's like a force, some sort of force transvergence or something, or something in the force, but in the reality of the universe. And there's this planet that's near it. And you said, this is all actually happened in Star Wars. They're going to go out and, go into the galaxy, and it turns out it's a certain amount of time before or after. That could work. I don't want it to. And that's not what I wanted from it. But I felt like it had the right amount of depth in its lore and the right amount of things. Like the ship design with the wings is absolutely incredible. They look like dragonflies.
The Omnithopters, yeah.
Yeah. I love, as soon as I saw them, I was like, I love the aesthetic. I love dirty sci-fi. I thought that every character felt like a person. It wasn't too over the top. I really enjoyed the performances. I like the visual cues. I do like, lots of elements of it. And I thought that I can easily see this becoming its own franchise. And I feel like if that film got released in 1977 instead of Star Wars, I would not be surprised if we would almost be talking in the way we are about Star Wars, about Dune. There'd be more Dune
that's
books.
A great point.
I know there's like 9 Dune or plus Dune books, but I know the first 2.5 were by the original author. He died, and then his son carried on the legacy. But I think what we're going to see with Dune, we're going to see sequels, we're going to see series, we're going to see other stuff as well.
Mike, just to clarify, what you're saying is that you see the Dune story taking place in the Star Wars universe. You're not saying that the movie imitates or emulates Star Wars storyline or vice versa.
I'm saying that although it is its own thing and it's in its own universe that's got enough weight to it to carry its own universe completely its own thing, I'm saying that there are elements within it that are elements I enjoy about Star Wars where I feel like it could fit in there. Because Star Wars...
And it's a good thing, that's what you're saying.
It's not bad at all. It's not a negative thing. I was very pleasantly surprised about how you can have a film which to me felt like it had so many similarities with Star Wars while completely standing on its own 2 feet. There was no point where there were points where I was like, oh, I see that Star Wars used this elements from the book and kind of translated it. And I feel like in an alternate universe, Dune could have taken the place of Star Wars. And I feel like the paths they go and because the thing is with Dune, one thing I will say about it is the first half of the film is heavy, not in a sense of negative things necessarily happening. There's just a lot of things to understand. You know,
Setup, yeah.
Yeah, and it's good. I really, once you get to the halfway sort of mark and everything starts to kind of come out and kind of connect with each other and things, it all becomes so, the payoff is great.
Yeah.
But it does take a while to get into it. But just the amount of lore in it, and that's one of the things I love. My favorite thing about Star Wars is the lore. Is just that it's in this galaxy far, far away, you know, and it's just this magical place where people basically have magic powers and technology's all crazy and amazing, but it's not paradise. That's it. It's just, here is an alternate version of life, in essence. And I just think Dune, I could watch, as long as the quality stays well, I could watch several films of either the same characters just on the planet, or if they venture out to see what the rest of this galaxy is about.
Yeah. Also would make a phenomenal, I think, open world video game, because in a video game, you don't want to be barraged by cinematics. You want to experience the world. And aesthetically, Dune is the sort of book that has bursts of action, and then the rest of kind of like, you almost don't read it, you live in it. Like you are in the scene, you are in this Dune desert, you are like the place itself is a character in a way. And that's kind of what you do in a video game, especially games like Tomb Raider, right? You jump in it, and you have a cinematic in the beginning of the game, and the rest of the story you make by experiencing the world around you.
Yeah, I feel like a game like Breath of the Wild, which is a game I adore, like the big free roam sort of just, you say open world, it's the same sort of thing. It's just, just here's a bit of cinema, and then you get like mini cutscenes when you do stuff, but there's no specific order. You don't have to do this thing or that thing, and I think that could work very well. And like, if they released, like, have you read any of the sequel books of Dune?
I'm on the second book right now, Dune Messiah.
I see. So do you know much about the structure of them? Is it like I don't want spoilers of the second book necessarily, but how much do you know about the way they go? Is it like, does the universe expand and things? I know some of them. So
what seems to happen, Kevin J. Anderson, the one who takes the duties of writing the later novels, he's a famous Star Wars author, and he makes a whole bunch of other. He's one of the most like famous sci-fi fantasy writers working in the industry right now. But he takes on later on expanding and growing the universe. But I think the immediate consequent books, if I'm not mistaken, Frank Herbert writes the first 6 books, and then the rest are written by his son, and later on his son supervises Kevin J. Anderson, and they kind of like collaborate together. But it seems like in the immediate future books is book 2 kind of takes this character of Paul Atreides, which we basically see his, well, you haven't seen it in the second half of the first book, which is the second movie coming, but you see basically him actualizing himself as a young man, as basically taking full reign of his destiny. And in the second book, the author twists the character on his head. It's almost a TLJ scenario where he takes the character that you knew and loved for his accomplishments in this first book, and he examines him later on in his life. But it's done very, very consciously, and by the same single mind who created the original Dune book, because he dared to ask the question, will your hero that you riled behind and waged this holy war, the jihad, right, that you see in the first half of the film, is it going to be the same person when he's touched with this kind of power? What's going to happen to him psychologically and mentally and spiritually 20 years from now? And a lot of fans criticize that second book. I know that for a fact. There's a huge following of Dune fans that wrote a lot of letters to Frank Herbert saying, what are you doing? That's not the hero that we came to see. That's what he's doing. And later books also address each house of these factions. It's almost like Game of Thrones, where it throws all the houses, pits them against one another. Consequent Dune books explore each house in detail.
I see. So there's plenty of room for filmmakers and series showrunners to be able to make a ton of Dune content. And I'm sure that I think there have been rumors, at least, of a series being made. Obviously, the second film's already been greenlit.
The Ben Gesserit series. I think, was it confirmed, or is it a rumor?
I'm not 100% sure. I've heard people in passing mention it, but I haven't seen anything about it. Hence why I've said rumor, because I can't confirm. I don't want to tell people, it's definitely greenlighted, and then there's nothing on the internet about it. But I thoroughly enjoyed Dune. I really, really liked it.
I'm glad you liked it, man.
Yeah, my only critique of it really is, and it's a minor gripe, is just that they could have probably shaved 5 or 10 minutes off on the basis that I know films do this to be cinematic and get you to feel the universe, but there were just a few too many shots, and The Revenant does this a lot, of it was just like the person standing there and staring, and then you see the sunset, and then you see the desert. And it's like, I get you're setting the scene, I get you're in the universe and stuff, you're doing the world, but I don't need 18 different shots of the desert. 10 will do. And there was one specific bit I remember where Timothée Chalamet, who plays the main character Paul, and he's standing there and he's starting to self-actualize, and he stares at the sunset. I was like, oh, that's quite a cool shot. And then it lasts about 8 seconds, and then it cuts, and then you just see him from behind him looking at the sun for about 5 seconds. And I'm like, this is like 15, 20 seconds of this dude staring at the sun. Like 3 seconds would have been fine. I get I don't need this long to see him realizing this. Timothée Chalamet is such a good actor. You can see it in his face like that. So that was my minor gripe, but that doesn't, I feel, take away from the film at all. It's just one of those minor things. I think for that being my main critique, that every now and then the camera lingers a bit too long, shows that how a film that's 2.5 hours or 2.5+ hours long and has so much in it. And that's my main critique. It just shows it's a really great film, and anyone who enjoys Star Wars, I really recommend watching it. Because
it's funny that you brought it when the way that you describe these longer shots, that's how the book felt. The book felt like, and it feels like, again, he forces you to follow him on this journey, and he just has these moments where he hits pause, deliberately so. But I never felt like it was a dull moment. To me, when I saw that cinema screen, like in the cinema, and me having the benefit of reading the book and having all that context, and the music just like blasting you in the face, I was like, I was revering every moment. My pulse quickened. I had like goosebumps. Oh man, it was such an experience.
Yeah, most people I know who read the book say that it's one of those things where the film, because of the sheer amount of depth there is in the book, it makes the film better. And a lot of people say that similarly with like Lord of the Rings, which once again, I've not read the Lord of the Rings books, but I know that although the films are held in very high regard from pretty much everyone I know who enjoys the books, loves the film as well. They're such a good adaptation. They're phenomenal. They did all the characters pretty well. Ignoring the Hobbit films, which I still think are great, but there's some issues there. But just me talking about the Lord of the Rings films.
I disagree, sir.
I love the Hobbit films. I love Hobbit and Lord of the Rings.
It was basically my imitation. I tapped into my inner method acting, and I basically imitated a Star Wars fan.
Yeah. But with like Lord of the Rings and things, I know that there's a character Tom Bombadil, and there's like loads of threads in the story, and there's the 3 main Lord of the Rings books, then there's the Silmarillion
something like that,
and something else, and they're all just pretty much lore books, and they're talking about like the times before and all that sort of thing, and they say like we understand that couldn't have been in the films. The films extended editions, I think Return of the King is like 4.5 hours long. An extended edition is amazing. But I only watched the extended editions like last year due to the lockdown. Me and Megan had some time. I took a bit of time off work, and over a week we watched we watched all 6, the Hobbit extended.
For the first time?
I've seen all the films before.
No, but extended edition specifically.
But first time extended. It was Megan's first time watching all the films in one go. She'd seen a couple. And I loved the extended editions. I'd seen Fellowship extended before, and one of the Hobbits extended as like 7 extra minutes. But what people say about Lord of the Rings, and including extended editions, is just that you get so much of it, but the things that weren't included, it would take so much time to explain that and to be able to visualize on screen, and to something that doesn't necessarily have a payoff. It's just part of the world. Tom Bombadil isn't in the films because he doesn't have as much of an impact in the way they've made the films as certain other characters would. So I feel like with Dune, is that an accurate sort of description of, or parallel to draw with Dune and the film?
It's surprisingly, for one important scene which they left off in that first part, which I can describe to you. I mean, you saw the first part. It's not a shock to anyone who saw the movie, that I felt should have been in the film. Even that doesn't distract from the overall story, because the artist, the filmmaker, is aware of our time, and then you need a reward even at the end of the film that is advertising itself as the chapter 1, right? There's one scene in the book where when Leto Atreides arrives to Arrakis. They get this mansion, and in this mansion, he wants to start appraising the kind of folks that he's surrounded by. He wants to appraise what kind of danger that he is, to gauge them, which ones he can bribe, which ones he can manipulate, which ones he should be cautious of. And he invites the members of every house to this party, and they have this feast, and they talk, and he kind of analyzes what's happening there. I felt it was a crucial scene, not only for world building, but to understand who this Leto Atreides is, what the Atreides house stands for, and later, when all the manipulation and betrayals and backstabbing starts happening, you have a more clear, complete picture of the inner workings of this empire, or what's happening. And you could clearly tell he did it. He reveres the source material, because each scene is recreated, A, respectfully, and B, I love when a filmmaker puts his own flair to the original work. When he doesn't replicate what's in the book on screen because it's just carbon copy. He wants to see that. He puts his own spin on it, his own language, his own aesthetic, his own point of view, right? Everything is done perfectly, except for that one scene. I felt like, I understand what you're doing. But once again, this is why you want to have both movie and the book, and you can enjoy both on different terms.
Yeah, exactly. It's good to have the sort of the media. And one thing I really appreciate with modern day, and what I'm very grateful for, you know, as well as all the other layers of privilege in my life, I'm happy to be born and to be alive in this era, because where modern technology is so good with filmmaking and things, there are things in sci-fi where even with the movies from, like, you know, Terminator 2 is a good example, where the CGI in that is still to this day absolutely fantastic. But it's because it's hyper focused on, you've got the physical effects of Arnold Schwarzenegger's face when it kind of comes off, but the primary thing is it's oh my god, I've just forgotten his name. The Robert Patrick, I think it is, the guy who plays the bad guy in Terminator 2 with the liquid metal thing. Like, he's the main one, which is the CGI is about. And because it's
I'm Googling right now. I'm listening to you, Michael, and I'm Googling his name, okay?
I should be doing that because I'm the host. But is it Robert Patrick?
Robert Patrick.
I was right, cool. So him, and he's the T-2000, I think. Him being the liquid metal and stuff, because James Cameron hyper-focused on that CGI element of it, that it looks so good. Whereas with a lot of sort of sci-fi films like Star Wars and like Dune and things like that, when you don't have technology to be able to do the budget that you to be able to do these unfathomably massive things and make it all work perfectly in budget and all these things, it's not always feasible. And one of the reasons, you know, the original trilogy of Star Wars did so well is because there's so much physical effects that it doesn't age in the same way. You know, physical effects, if it looked real, for the most part, you get some really old horror films with, like, you know, the giant ants and things like that, you know, they're a bit much, but generally speaking, when you get the right amount of physical effects and things, you get it with some of the old school sort of Jim Henson movies like Labyrinth and Dark Crystal and stuff. Like, they still hold up because it looks real. But the problem is with CG is when you've got computer generated components, if it's not on point, it ages so quickly. And you even get
special
films from the early
editions,
2000s.
man. Star Wars special editions. I still can't get over it. That musical number, the Return of the Jedi, that Jabba the Hutt in Episode 4. Holy Christ, man! Like, what are you thinking? Like, I understand clearing the alpha channels of those TIE fighters and the ships. I get it. I get that the attack on the first Death Star is done at bare minimum cost. And later on, CGI effects kind of sort of completed, but like the rest of it is. Just to add to what you're saying, when practical effects are done really well and cleverly, movies from 60s and 70s hold up well. One of the movies that I grew up with, actually, by Wolfgang Petersen, Enemy Mine. Have you ever seen it? With Dennis Quaid. It came out in 1985. It was one of the first American sci-fi films which I saw in theater. An American film, fully dubbed, and it blew me the freak away, man. It was amazing, amazing movie. It's very much in vein of Star Wars. You have starships and all the things happening, and you have this American pilot fighting these alien species, crash landing on the same planet as one alien who shot him down. And he basically adventure on this planet, and two enemies become friends like brothers. The special effects in that, first of all, it's Wolfgang Petersen. His name should be known to any film watcher. But that film had CGI, not CGI, practical effects so well done. It's so well thought out. Like I recently picked up a European version of that Blu-ray because I enjoy collecting physical Blu-rays. You look at that stuff, I'm like, man, it still looks wonderful today. It's something that CG even today can't replace. It's different. I'm not trying to sound like purist. You look at Rogue One, and it looks phenomenal. Nothing in it you could identify as CG even. But it's a certain beauty when you look at the craftsmanship and you realize that it is an effect, but it still holds up so well. It's so eloquently done. I love looking at stuff like that,
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's one of those things. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, Scott, about sort of old school sci-fi and how there's so much imagination and so much. Well, imagination is probably the best way to put it. Is just that in a lot of the
artistry.
And in the early 1900s, when you had a lot of these sci-fi things being written, it was a lot of the stuff was like people were unable to comprehend it. A good example of that was like H.P. Lovecraft, where you use the word incomprehensible quite a lot. But like that sort of thought, and then as technology has gotten so much better and we get to these things, we're getting like more audiences are getting to experience these things, but they are all still, as you said earlier, interpretations. And that's one of the things about whenever a film comes from a book, is just that, Lord of the Rings of Peter Jackson, I don't know how many directors would have been able to do a job that was so universally appreciated. There's so few films that come out. I think Harry Potter is probably one of the only other ones that I can think of, which are still, for the most part, amazing. There's parts they left out, but those two film series come from books and they did a stellar job. But there are so many other films that come out of books which they've just focused on the wrong thing. Some people read dialogue, and if they think, oh, this works partly as a comedy, they might start writing it as a comedy, and then the execs come in and go, oh, it's kind of a comedy thing. Okay, let's push harder on the comedy. And then by the time the film comes out, it's like, this is like nearly a comedy film, when the original source material, at least from other people's, or the majority of people's perspectives, was seen as not funny at all. It was completely serious. And it's things like that, of a mix of not only budgetary constraints and actors that you get and directors, but also, as you said earlier, the film studios and things, which have, they put ingredients into this mix that come out with the final product. And it's quite rare to have something that is so massive, like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or Dune, and make it work well. And when it does, and it lands, it's just it's an incredible thing to witness.
Yeah, man, it's a gift. When you get something like, I'm also so hyped about the future James Cameron Avatar movies. I'm such a fan of the original. It's like, it's a gift to, I took my parents to see Avatar, and they were like having these 3D glasses, like taking them off like kids in kindergarten, like waving at the screen, like, Dad, what are you doing? Like, put your hand back. Like, I was like embarrassed. My dad was like, this looks real, man. My father is like the guy who put me on Star Wars. He put me on science fiction. He's still very much a kid. I show him any Marvel movie today. He's like, I can't believe they make movies like this. He eats it all up indiscriminately. To him, it's like he doesn't care what the critics say. He's like, New Iron movie's out, I gotta watch it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and so I want to ask as well, as we kind of lean into Star Wars and things, I want to ask, what is your favourite way to consume content? So in a sense of, if we speak about, say, sci-fi as an example, like, is your favourite books? Is it movies? Is it TV series, comics? Like, do you have a preferred medium? Like, if someone came to you and said, well, no, I'll ask about Star Wars specifically in a bit, but if I just talk about general things that you like to consume content in, is there a favourite of yours?
Books and movies, I would say. I play tons of video games, more so than I watch shows, but my father tricked me into reading books in a very clever way. The first book I ever read was Treasure Island.
Yeah.
And the way that I read it, so our father, he brought us this world classics library for kids, which was illustrated with amazing leather binding, and he put it all on the shelf in our room, and it just sat there. He never said, I'll give you a treat if you read this book or do that. Smart boys must read. That was the school's job. They gave us like 10, 15 books or 20 books sometimes they had to read during a summer recess, right? But the way that my father did it, he left the Treasure Island on my desk in my room one summer. And I came off from playing soccer with my friends. I'm like, what's this book doing here? I didn't take it out. I got to put it back on the shelf. At the moment I grabbed it, I was like, hold on a second, there's pirates in it. What's this picture? And once you start reading, I got into the habit of reading like world classic, Around the World in 80 Days, Jungle Book, all that stuff. There's a certain quality about books and a certain interaction that you have with it is so intimate, where when the imagery is not provided for you. And that also translated very well when I started reading in English, because it's the same experience amplified, because in English, when you don't understand 40% of vocabulary, you either become frustrated, or the other avenue is to fulfill that stuff that you don't understand with your imagination. I misinterpreted a lot of Star Wars character names. I misinterpreted a lot of scenes, a lot of sci-fi that I read. I couldn't even understand the description of a space battle. It was hard. It's hard even for me today to read all that scientific jargon or like a space pilot jocks, like different terminology. That is difficult for me to grasp what's happening in 3D. But the beauty of it is that you can set aside what the original intent is, so you're not frustrated, and recreate it in your mind. And I think each successful, prolific author's task is to light that candle in darkness, to give you just enough light to be surrounded by magic. And one example I love to bring is when you say, what is your favorite thing to experience, whether it's a movie or a book or a video game, it's clearly literature. I'll tell you why. When I came to the United States with the knowledge of Conan the Barbarian only through Arnold Schwarzenegger film, I thought that was all to it. A big muscle meathead dude, swiveling his sword and making for one of the most interesting adventure films in Hollywood. And then I come across the books, right? The short stories of Robert E. Howard. And I said, oh, wait a second. It's a swashbuckling character that came from 30s. Let me read these cheesy adventures and see what it's all going to be about. And I read my first short story of Conan the Barbarian. And it's not at all what I expected it to be. It is not swashbuckling, womanizing, dumb comic book brute who just kicks ass. Robert E. Howard is a master of the short form, right? He's right there with Edgar Allan Poe. And what Robert E. Howard managed to do is literally through one paragraph of his short story, you're transported into his world. And nothing can replicate that. Not movies, not video games. Something magical happens. I could read that on a train and not hear all the noise, all the people bickering with one another. That's the power of literature. Like, you start interacting with text in such a way, it's magical. It's unreal, man.
Yeah, I agree. Because even when I was younger and things, I used to read all the time, and I had a light that was a globe. So so my geography used to be, when I was young, very well, because I had a globe right next to my bed and I had the light on, so it globe at night. And I used to read late at night, and then when I heard my parents going to bed, I'd turn the light off, wait for them to go to sleep, and then turn the light back on and read again. And I'd fall asleep with the light on, and around the top of the globe, where the plastic bit kind of connected in, it started to melt, because it was left on overnight for so long and things. And I remember I was reading, I was so passionate about it and things. And then I went to college and things, and then got a job and moved out and that sort of thing. And I stopped reading for quite a while. It was several years, actually. And then the reason I started reading Star Wars comics is because a friend of mine bought me a couple of variant covers of the first Dr. Aphra issues. And I was like, oh, Dr. Aphra, I've not heard of this Star Wars character. I've seen all the films, and I'd watched all of Clone Wars and all of Rebels, and I think this was before The Mandalorian had come out, but it was announced and things. And I was like, okay, that's cool. I've been getting into Star Wars a bit more recently, so I'll read the comics. I haven't got into those. And so I bought Dr. Aphra, and then they cross over with Star Wars, and then they cross over with Darth Vader and all sorts of other things. And it became a thing where it all interconnected, and I was like, oh, I'm going to start reading the Star Wars books again. And when I started picking them up, I blitzed through them. Like, before I had the Star Wars podcast, where now I have to read, a comic or batch of comics every week, and then, make notes about that and then record and release it. Before, all my time was taken up by podcasting, basically. I would just go to bed, and then for 2 hours straight, just read. And whenever I'd get a free moment, if Megan was out or something, I would just read. And I read through loads of Star Wars books from doing that, mainly some Claudia Gray books and things. And then I've been getting into the High Republic again recently. And I haven't been as excited for a book as I have been for some of the adult High Republic novels, as I have been maybe my whole life, because even when I was a kid I used to read really random things. There was a couple of like sci-fi stories that was about like artificial intelligence, I think it's called Eager, but then I'd also read like zombie novels and things. I read one which was quite cool called Empire, and it was about a zombie apocalypse happening, but then Death, the Grim Reaper, was stuck on Earth, and but he couldn't kill anyone. He could kill zombies, but they weren't truly dead, so he wasn't fulfilling anything. Book, yeah. It's cracking. It's a really cool book. And and I read some sci-fi spy books. I read all kinds of varied things, but like none were in a franchise. I always say this on my show, is the reason I love Star Wars more than anything is twofold. Is because of nostalgia, because it's connected with my late dad, who obviously passed away, and I have the original 6. I used to always watch with him, and he used to buy me, like Star Wars: The Force Unleashed, my favorite Star Wars game ever, one of my favorite games ever. He bought me that, and I'd never even heard of it. He was like, oh, I saw reviews for this, I know you love Star Wars, this sort of thing. And there's lots of games. Star Wars Bounty Hunter was another one, and lots of Star Wars games I got, especially when I was a lot younger and couldn't buy games, he would get for me because he'd look up reviews and get that. So this underlying Star Wars love was there, while simultaneously you feel rewarded as an individual. And I think we spoke about this on your podcast, and it's that especially with the new canon and things, where it's got like, if you read all these things, you don't have to. You can consume as much or as little Star Wars as you want. You can just watch the films, and that's completely fine. You can watch the films in the series. That's fine. And the more you read, the more depth certain elements of stories become, and it builds this whole universe. So even though I'm reading High Republic books set 200 plus years before the Skywalker saga, there's still threads that connect, but then they also intertwine to the High Republic era, and it links back in with that mythology, where it's like Star Wars is often described as like a space mythology, and it's just because you can do almost anything with it, and that's the genius of Star Wars. That's one of the things where lightning in a bottle is the term I've heard you use and many others use, is just that with what George Lucas managed to do with the films, and then with what Legends, Timothy Zahn especially when he did Heir to the Empire and things, when all that sort of happened, you've got these mythological movies, then you've also got these books that reinforce this mythological story, and also you had the comics at the time as well to add another element of it. And so now it's just like with audio dramas and everything, in every facet of media consumption, you can consume Star Wars, and whether it's in a little way, a word here and there, or if it's in a big way, it connects to the rest of this modern mythology. And I think that's some of the beauty of it. And I think books hugely push that.
Now, just to clarify, so Star Wars got you into comic book reading. You haven't read comics before?
I had read comics before, but not as much as I do now. So I read, when I was younger, the first comics I ever read was Marvel Zombies, when I was probably about 12. Video games is how I got into comic book characters. So I already loved Spider-Man, Venom, Daredevil, like all these sort of things, and the X-Men and stuff like that, because I'd watched the X-Men animated show, the Spider-Man cartoon, and then mainly played video games, and lots of them cross over and do all that sort of stuff before licensing was such a thing. They could just pop up in each other's content and games. And so I read Marvel Zombies, and I read like a handful of other comics here and there. I used to always read something called the Beano, and a little bit called the Dandy, and the Beano is like this. It's got Dennis the Menace in it, which is probably the most famous thing. And then there's Roger the Dodger and loads of other silly characters. And I used to read that a lot, and Garfield quite a lot of things when I was younger. And then once again, I started reading books. I went off comics. I never really read a lot of comics when I was younger. Read a bit of Marvel Zombies, read a few bits and pieces here and there. And then once I got into the Star Wars comics and got my Star Wars podcast and connected with the guys in Comics in Motion, some of them are massive Batman fans. They're like, okay, here's the 10 essential Batman reads. And some of them are like, well, here's some indie comics that are really good that you're really going to love. Oh, and here's some more stuff. Oh, there's a Marvel character called Moon Knight who's really cool. Why don't you read some of this? Oh, there's a series that's just been announced about that. So there's all these threads that have come together. So now I'm trying to read, and obviously Alan Moore, the Miracle Man books as well.
That's
and
a
things
big
like
one.
that. Yeah, so there's so many, and Neil Gaiman's obviously written like Sandman and things, which is what I'm starting to read at the moment. So there's so many different parts of it, and comics, because of my mate just buying me some variant covers of Star Wars, because I like Star Wars. He started off my second podcast. I've read every Star Wars canon comic now that is in Marvel. I haven't read all of IDW's, and the only one I haven't read yet is Poe Dameron's series, which I'll be doing this in 2022, and I'll be completely up to date with that. And I'm trying to read and consume all canon content. It's just the books now, because there's so many coming out.
I can't wait. I will be like, the Spanish Inquisition on top of you after you finish your canon reading. I can't wait for you to begin to read the Dark Horse era Star Wars comic books and us talking about it.
I've read a bit of
Boy,
Rogue Squadron, but only a smidge.
I can't picture what the just. I want to see the expression on your face. I was like, oh, Ben, I read the Knights of the Old Republic comic. We need to talk about this. Here's another podcast. Like, I want to see your expression on your face after you read that. Like, I'm very curious to see what you're gonna think.
Yeah, because Knights of the Old Republic, like I am very excited for canon to eventually tackle the Old Republic stuff, which I think when they're finished with the High Republic era, they're probably going to do another jump and then another jump, or they're going to start with a movie first and then they'll kind of expand around that. But like Old Republic stuff, like I've heard a lot about it, and I've got the Book of the Sith, the Legends book, which is, just a culmination of bits and pieces of the general Sith history, which I really like. And I've been listening to Shatterpoint as well, which is excellent. I really enjoy that. And Legends was something originally, if you'd asked me a year or so ago, I was like, nope, just want to read canon, just want everything that kind of, in air quotes, matters. And then, all the video game stuff that I knew from Star Wars, though that's all Legends, especially Starkiller from The Force Unleashed and things.
Yeah.
And then as I've kind of caught up somewhat with the canon, for the most part, the majority of canon books I haven't read now are like specific character books that I'm not as interested in. I've heard good things about some of them, but like there's Tarkin, there's Phasma, there's a few others. I mean, there's things like the Force Collector that I'm quite interested by that I've got, and I want to read the Certain Point of View Empire Strikes Back. But because I've got Audible now, where there's so many Legends things on there, and where they're bringing out all those lovely new Legends books as well, that I love the look of so many of them. It's like, well, I want to get into the Rule of Two. I want to get into, I've heard the story of Revan and things from, the Old Republic games and things, and I want to delve more into that. So with Legends, there are so many more things where so many of them still fit into the canon. Even Shatterpoint, apart from, I know the ending, but apart from what happens with one of the main characters in that couldn't happen because of rebels and things. If you just change that, that character's name and just said Mace has got a different apprentice, he had two, that the whole of that story basically could work. So I kind of, in my own head, I'm kind of like, I like
you can make it work. You're the end user. I always say to my listeners is that what does it matter, canon or Legends? It's as real as you want it to be. It's all fiction. It's like do you read Marvel books? Do you understand the concept of parallel universes? That's what it is. And the main argument is always like, well, no, they discontinued, not telling more stories. I'm like, look, everything must run its course. At one point, one thing ends and another one follows. Guess what? It's one of the biggest themes in Star Wars. You must learn to let go. I love this stuff to pieces, man. It's like Star Wars books got me through the darkest times of my life, right? Literally. Mm-hmm. And I mean it, like when I say it. It's time to put it on the shelf and like, okay, let this stuff exist here. This is part of my life. It was very important to me. I'll cherish it. But now let's enjoy all this new stuff,
Mm-hmm. And in that theme as well, I want to ask, like with your YouTube channel, so which I recommend to everyone and things, and it's a lot of fun being on there and listening too. What made you start the YouTube channel in particular? I know it was, tell people how long ago it was, and what was kind of the reason that you kind of went one day, I'm going to start a Star Wars YouTube channel.
So it's literally turning 1 year this December. I started last year. I should have started 2 years ago, just when the pandemic started. I was like at home, not working, depressed, not using my graphic design skills too effectively. But anyway, I started last year along with my younger brother who started with his gaming channel that he kind of like abandoned it, went into heavy metal reactions, and I started doing Star Wars. And the main reason was I just got sick and tired of people talking crazy shit online about Star Wars. Legends this, canon that. It's like the one thing that pisses me off, it's like, and I don't mean to sound like a gatekeeper, like who knows it all, who like for some reason has some kind of like staple ownership of this franchise that other younger people don't, just because I read it for 20 plus years. But you have these younger schmucks coming into these discussions who barely read past maybe 5 or 10 books, like, well, Legends was better because of this. And they don't seem to have a grasp of what they're talking about. That the older Star Wars books, yes, they were loosely based on one common concept of continuity and canonical kind of like timeline of events, and George Lucas kind of supervised and then he would extrapolate things from it and retailer it and put it into something like Clone Wars to make it his own. So there was always an understanding of George Lucas saying in plain English, look, there's my Star Wars, the stuff that I create. And then there's all these talented and beautiful authors and comic book artists who complete this universe with their stories, right? He always prioritizes, and there's evidence in there. I bring examples all the time where he would take something that he enjoyed from expanded universe, make it his own, and rework it, change it, retcon it, whatever he wanted to do. It was his thing to play around with. And for me, it got so tiring at one point of people focusing on the wrong things. Instead of focusing on things that we enjoy, that we like, and that unites us, it feels like what Joe Rogan and podcasters, guests that he invites to talk about, is that people seem to thrive on conflict and they enjoy talking shit more than talking positive things. And they enjoy taking out their frustrations of coming back from a long day's work and cursing somebody out because he didn't understand their 2 lines of comments they were making on a Star Wars forum. When I got the pleasure and honor of interviewing Kenneth Flint, the guy who wrote the self-published Heart of the Jedi novel, right? It was the first Legends book which was self-published in 6 years. It came out in 2015, self-published on the internet, and then it was briefly seen on Amazon this year that made some incredible sales and went out of print. When I talked to him and I said, Mr. Kenneth, what do you feel about modern fans and their opinions and like social media and people get to interact? And he goes like, well, I never listened to criticism of my books because if you don't write books, what business have you professionally critiquing books, right? And second of all, yes, you can have your opinion and you shouldn't buy my books if you don't like them. I'm writing books for my fans, clearly, for people who like this stuff. He said, I feel it's quite presumptuous and arrogant when people are making their opinions known to the world. Well, I feel this, and they obviously have to bang the table or whatever surface is in the vicinity. I feel this way. It's so arrogant to believe. Just today, look, I released this little stupid meme where I'm comparing Luke Skywalker's training session versus Rey's training session, and I said they're very two alike, and it all depends on the perspective of the audience, of the person who is interpreting these events. If you don't feel that this particular movie doesn't work, it's good. I understand that it doesn't work for you. Your opinion has all the right in the world to exist next to mine, right? My opinion also matters, and you don't hold the truth, and neither do I. Let's have a discourse, and that's the origin of my channel. Bring people around the round table and have a discussion. And that's why I love having you on. That's why I like having Josh on. I like to engage people in a conversation who disagree with me so I can understand their perspective, so I can understand their worldview.
Yeah, exactly. And, when you started off with your like Star Wars channel and things, like the way it is now, did you expect it to be that way when you first started? And have you got sort of plans where to go from here? Or are you just kind of being like, I'm releasing what I feel like? Like, what sort of, if there is a plan at all?
All I wanted to do was start talking about Star Wars Legends and canon books, and to demonstrate that to an old dog reader like myself, there really isn't difference. I always pick and choose what I like about Legends, and I always pick and choose about canon by investigate all of them. Every book that I talk about on my channel, I've read. Some of them I like, some of them dislike, and I want to paint a picture of that Legends wasn't this immaculate, ideal thing, perfectly canonical, perfectly supervised by Lucas, all perfect before the Disney took over. And I'm basically imitating, once again, my inner method acting, modern fans. I'm painting the picture that with somebody who grew up reading this stuff is that it's always nuanced, and fans' interpretations and fans' reactions were always layered, and for example, the huge Yuzong Vam War, the epic New Jedi Order 19-book series was divisive. It was polarizing. Some fans liked it, some fans didn't. Some fans felt it was too dark, too gritty, too sci-fi for Star Wars. Other fans felt like this is exactly what Star Wars needed to break new ground and try something different, and that's exactly what it does. Some people felt like, the Solo twins that we see in Legends and a young Jason Solo's journey is much more impactful than the new Disney stuff, and that's what they should focus on, and so forth. And I invite those fans and say, look, hey guys, I'm kind of like one of your crowd. I'm the Legends dude. I read this stuff. I cherish it. I know all those authors, but I also checked out this stuff over here. And some new authors also good, and Claudia Gray and Charles Soule and Kevin Scott and all these guys and Jason Fry, they're kicking ass too. Check it out. And it's like it just irked me hearing all this High Republic nonsense. I'm like, I'm gonna start a channel that first and foremost will talk about the books, and let me see what else snowballs and comes out of it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things I always encourage people to start podcasts or start YouTube channels or anything like that, because neither yourself or me or any of our friends or things have started for this reason. But just to clarify, the meaning is that we're not doing this to become rich and famous. If that happened, that would be delightful. If we could make enough money to live on YouTube and podcasting and become famous enough to be able to talk to all these incredible individuals involved with Star Wars and that sort of thing, that would be amazing. That's not why we do it. We do it because we're passionate about these things and we want to start a conversation. And one of the things I found specifically that I didn't necessarily consider as much when I started, especially the Star Wars podcast, was how much, when I started the channel, it's made me enjoy Star Wars more. Because where I've got this thing where, because I've got the channel and I'm like, okay, before I spoke to Claudia Gray, there was one Claudia Gray book that I hadn't read, and that was Leia, Princess of Alderaan. And I was like, I'm not that interested by Princess Leia, especially a prequel before A New Hope, because I was like, I know where she's going to go with this. I like Leia as a character. I prefer her when she's older as opposed to when she's younger. It's a young adult novel, so I had my presumptions over it, even though I'd already read her other young adult books, which were excellent, like Lost Stars, and also her other adult novels, Bloodline and Master and Apprentice at that time, which are both excellent too. So I picked it up, and I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. I couldn't put it down. I finished that book probably quicker than any of her other books, apart from maybe not Lost Stars, because that blew me away as well. But like, I'm so happy I read that. But I wouldn't have read that unless I was going to speak with Claudia Gray. And it's the same with comics. There's been comics I'm like, I'm not interested by Target Vader. Like, what, some bounty hunters trying to kill Vader, around the time of A New Hope that are clearly going to fail because obviously we know when Vader dies. And then I read it and I was like, oh, Dengar's really cool in this. Oh, Valance, he's a cool character, quite interesting. Oh, he was in that Han Solo Imperial Cadet comic that I probably wouldn't have read if I wasn't doing the channel. Oh, there's this new series, Bounty Hunters. If I wasn't doing the War of the Bounty Hunters on my channel, I may not have even picked up a series called Bounty Hunters because I wasn't as intrigued by them. But then because of the channel and stuff, and because of the show that I do, I've had to go out and try all these things in the canon that I may not have picked up before. It's really enthralled me. And I wonder if you've experienced something similar, where it's kind of reignited some of your loves of Star Wars, and you've tried like different things.
Specifically with my channel or reading books in general?
Let's go with your channel first of all.
With channel, not really, because I'm already imprisoned in the Star Wars world for life. It's like when my brother was starting his channel, and I'm like, what should I start my channel by? He's like, are you kidding me, dude? Star Wars. It's like, you live Star Wars. Like, that's what you make a channel. There's no question about it. No, with channel, no, I'm deeply, what the channel made me more cognitive of is being more structured with my language when I talk about Star Wars. For example, when I started doing these shorts, I started doing them as an exercise for myself, because I'm not a very techie person when it comes to like military terminology or like equipment and XYZ, cannon engines or shield generators, this and that, all those specs. I'm a dummy when it comes to that. So that's why I don't play video games like Battlefield or Call of Duty. I get lost in them. But when I started doing shorts, and you go to a Wikipedia page, let's say today I'm doing a video on technology, right? Shield generators, or I just recently did the one on AT-AT Walker. I want to sound like encyclopedia. I want to know exactly what I'm talking about. I know exactly what the term for this particular great shield, what it protects this vehicle against, what's the capability of the armaments, what are the cannons for, what kind of tactical deployments would the Empire use this vehicle in. It made me a lot more knowledgeable there. And I no longer just look at the screen. Oh, look, man, it's the walkers. Like we as the kids in Russia, we used to call ATST walkers chicken walkers. As they look like chicks. We're like, oh, look, it's a chicken walker. Nah, I know my specs. So I feel like that's under my belt. I'm like, I can talk with expertise about these particulars now.
Yeah, I feel like my understanding of canon and connections has helped a lot, like with species primarily. Like when I started the channel, I knew like a small handful. Everyone knows what a Wookiee is, and most people know what a Twi'lek is, and then there's a few others that people Kaminoans are a bit more, but then and Trandoshan, but then you get into sort of the weirder species, that it's like, oh, the Shagrians, or you go into some of the depths of like, okay, well, you've got the Duros and look like this, and then you've got the Quirmians, and the Quirmians, although they look like Kaminoans, actually come from, they've got the common ancestry with the Duros and things. And it's like Nemoidians, I know, with Newt Gunray and things. And because with my show, what I try and do is I read through a thing, and whenever I have to like go, oh, I recognize that person, and then you look it up on normally Wikipedia, or I've got quite a lot of reference books as well that I check out and things.
Yeah.
And when I check those things, and I go, oh man, this is quite a cool fun fact. This is like an annotation, and that's how I structure my notes for the show, and then that's how I do it when I read it. So read it out to explain to people what the plot is and things, and the obviously connections. That's the point of the show. Yeah. And so it adds for me, because then I'm like, oh yeah, what is that thing? And I know, I recognize. So when I'm reading it, I don't need to necessarily know. And I'm like, oh, and this is blah 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 because he's this and that. And then I tell people like, I know a lot about Star Wars, but I'm like, I don't know the most about Star Wars, as people know way more than me. And then, which is still true. But then I hang out with everyone else I know outside of the Star Wars podcasting realm, and they're like, Mike, what's this and what's that? And you go, blah, 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 and they go,
right,
how do you know all that? And I'm like, oh, I don't know that much. I mean, I don't even know, I don't even know the specs or the difference between those two ships over there. It's like, I don't even know what the names of those ships are. It's like,
I don't know anything. I don't know anything, man. I feel like I'm such a noob. And, I would listen to somebody like Star Wars Theory or Star Wars Explained, and I catch stuff that they're stumbling on. I'm like, oh, he had to research that too? I guess I'm not that stupid. I know my Star Wars ABCs. Okay. I kind of like pat myself on the shoulder, like, okay, I know my stuff. All right. But no, every time, like every day, there's so much to learn. It's either stuff I forget, because you start compartmentalizing when you read so much. Like between 40K and Dungeons and Dragons and Dragonlance and all that stuff, you can't start remembering all those names, planet names, and factions. You kind of like put them in the back of your mind. And when somebody starts asking me a Star Wars question, I got to go and reference quick. I know this stuff, but I need to refresh my memory. Like if we're talking about what is a Katana fleet, I'm like, oh, Katana fleet, the fleet that Admiral Thrawn was looking for. What was the time period and what were parties involved? Then you start like going deeper into it.
I used to always, well, I still do. I go down Wikipedia and Google rabbit holes anyway when it's something. Whenever a word comes up I don't understand, I'm always defining it, and then I go, that looks like another word, and then I look up the history of the word and things. And then now Star Wars is like, whenever something comes up, like one thing I was doing quite a lot when I was reading the High Republic books was when there was a species that would come up, I would often look up on my phone and I'd be like, oh, okay, I know. Is that species, like, is this? And then you go and you go, oh yeah, this species is blah, 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 and other, famous members of this species are that. And I go, okay, helps me visualize the High Republic stuff a bit more. And so I want to ask you a question which is fairly abstract in certain ways, which is, what is Star Wars to you? And you can interpret that question however you kind of want. But for you to describe what Star Wars is to you, how would you vocalize that?
Luke Skywalker.
Interesting.
Younger Mark Hamill sort of looked like my oldest cousin. Was like athletic. He wasn't very tall, but he was like well built. And his face, I don't know, when he was younger, very, very similar to young Mark Hamill. And every time he used to come to our house, I was like, oh, that's Luke Skywalker. He, since childhood, personified this ultimate adventure of any kid, myself included, could be like him. He wasn't special. He didn't have these special skills. As a kid, I never saw him or his bloodline as something that was revered before, as like a noble blood or royal blood. He was a village bumpkin, something that I was growing up in a small town in Russia, right? And when you see somebody who has these humble beginnings go on this journey and attain power and achieve all these special feats through struggle, through suffering, through perspective gained, through failure, all of that stuff, he's everything to me. To this day, when I look upon Star Wars, I seem to gravitate towards characters or heroes which are similar with him in a way that they parallel a sort of similar type of progression. Like, for example, I'm in the middle of listening to Dooku Jedi Lost, and before that, I just finished, and today I posted the review of Tempest Runner. And even though Lorna D, right, this High Republic Nihil character who's like the Stormbringer, this evil person, the book personifies her in a way, but more importantly, it gives context to her background and shows us, that gives us the insight why she becomes the way that she is. What led her on this path where Luke's route took him to the good side, her route took her to the bad side. And she's not even a Jedi. But the point is, watching that progression of a character and the journey that they make, I still see Luke in that. I see that template that established through Luke's character. You know, I always loved Harrison Ford. Obviously, all the kids knew him in Russia as the famous Indiana Jones movies and all the other movies that he has done. Carrie Fisher, we weren't very familiar with because we didn't have any other movies with her but Star Wars. And it was nice to see. It was always four to me. It was never three heroes, you know, because Billy D. Williams, even though he shows up in the second film, right, of the trilogy, it was always the big four with us kids. It was never the big three. But for me, I always looked up to Luke. Him on Dagobah, him learning about the Force. He carries the torch in that trilogy. He's the one who delivers the rebellion. So he is Star Wars to me.
That's a very interesting answer. Yeah. Because it's one of the things where, as I said earlier, like because of Star Wars Connected Universe, I feel like for me, there's an element of me, I've always been either a completionist or a collector. They're both two things that have been common in my life. You know, I've got over 500 DVDs, I've got like over 100 Blu-rays, I've got vinyls, I've got like little figurines and things. At the moment it's mainly Star Wars comics, and because I'm trying to get every single canon Star Wars comic, with IDW stuff it's a little bit harder, and I don't want to read necessarily every single IDW comic because a lot of it is anthology stuff and aimed at a younger audience, so not like top tier on my to-do list. But with the High Republic era coming out especially, it was something I was quite interested by, and I was like, oh, you know, maybe I'll give that a go. And then Light of the Jedi came out and I read that, and I was like, this is probably the best, not only the best Star Wars book I've read, but this is probably the top 10 best books I've ever read. I think this is just phenomenal. And then I was like, okay, well, I'll give a couple of the other ones a read. And I read Into the Dark, and I was like, that's really good. It's a good Claudia Gray book. It wasn't, for me, I didn't enjoy it as much as some of our other stuff, but I did really enjoy it. But then the weird thing for me was when I picked up the Junior book, just as like it's almost like on a whim. It was really cheap somewhere, like months after. I wasn't necessarily, like I was umming and ahhing. I was like, should I read all High Republic? Should I not? I've read all the comics. And I picked up the Junior novel, and it was amazing as well. And I was like, what? And it's got like some pictures in which I really appreciated as well. And it felt like, you know, I was achieving a lot when I read it. And now that I've got the physical books, I'm just like, when the next wave came out, so with the Rising Storm, Out of the Shadows, and Race to Crash Point Tower, I did the same thing again. But I was like, but I need to buy these ones. And then I actually read the Junior novel before the young adult novel. So I read the adult one, Junior, and now I'm on the young adult. And I'm just getting that completionist feel of me again, where I'm just like, I want to have all the High Republic books. I want to own them all on a nice bookshelf and things. And me and my girlfriend, we're trying to get a house, and we had an offer accepted just like yesterday or the day before, so we should be getting a house
nice.
like in the next few months, man. And things. Thank you. So I'm very excited about that, and we've been talking, we want to have shelves up, and she's going to have a lot of our cookbooks up, and I'm going to have these, because the High Republic books, the print on the spines and things, they're just beautiful, and I just want to have them on show. And now I'm getting that thing where I'm collecting stuff. It's adding to this modern mythology. It's supporting, you know, these authors that have put their so much work into these elements and things. It's adding to my podcast, which is my passion as well. And I'm getting to get introduced to so many more people, such as yourself. All that stems from me just really liking Star Wars. You know what I mean? It's incredible.
So it's a collector, and in that respect, we're very similar. I also I am a completionist, and I love collecting. But I love to preserve my stuff in pristine condition. Like, if it's not going to be well maintained, I don't collect. But I'm also very practical about what I collect. Like with books, I don't get any of these, you know, like limited run or out of print editions or mega collection. I'm like, no. Give me the stuff that was on the shelf in the regular bookstore. That's the part of history I want to be behind. I don't want anything special. I don't want anything extraordinary. And I want it to be practical. Like the only Star Wars things that I collect are either books or video games because I put them to use. Only reason I have those figurines is because I use them for my little photography project. But for me, Star Wars is something that I consume, not something that I display. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in that respect, we're different.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair enough. I mean, it's I've always been someone like, I mean, right there, like you can't see because the laptop thing, but I've got some Funko Pop things there as well. I've got Lego all around me and things, but I do consume quite a lot of other content digitally. So, for example, you know, the audiobooks, for example, I'm not going to buy every Star Wars book. I'm not going to own every Star Wars book. It's just, there's too many, especially when you go into Legends. It's insanity. There's so many of them. I don't have space for that. And I can only consume so much. So I won't buy something unless I have a specific intent on reading it, or if it's a DVD or something, or specifically watching it. But with the High Republic, it's like reading digitally. I prefer having a physical book when it's a normal book. But when it's comics, I like having it physically when I first get it because I read it. And then when I do the podcast, I do it digitally. I've got Marvel Unlimited. And so it's just easier when I'm talking into a microphone to scroll on an iPad rather than, you know, having to turn a page and edit out the sound of me turning a page and stuff. And one of the things with the other Marvel comics though and stuff is I don't own pretty much any Marvel comics apart from a couple of Deadpool ones. Because with Marvel Unlimited, there's so many. Trying to
get everything, and
if you were trying to collect every Spider-Man run of literally just the run, The Amazing Spider-Man, they're past issue 900. It's there's no point even starting.
Not including the Amazing Spider-Man, the Ultimate Spider-Man, all the different variations.
The Web of Spider-Man, and then you've got Ben Reilly Spider-Man. Yeah, there's a ridiculous amount. So it's like trying to buy them when I've just got them on Marvel Unlimited. I'll flip between series, pick out the storylines that I want. That's fine. But with the main reason I've done it with the High Republic, because I haven't done it with the other Star Wars books. I did it with all of Claudia Gray's because she only had like 5. So I was like, okay, that's quite nice and easy. And hopefully one day she'll come to the UK and I can get to sign some stuff. But with the High Republic, the way, because it's at the start of, I was already into Star Wars when it started, it's easy to just keep caught up. Whereas when you're trying to go back, like with the comics, for example, that was slightly more difficult. But when Dr. Aphra 1 came out, that was 2016. Well, the comics only started 2015. So I only had to buy a handful of comics, and then I just had to keep buying the comics that I was getting and things, and just every new series that come out, just add to my basket. And so over time, it's little bits, but it's easy when you start from the start. But like Legends, I'm never going to consume all of Legends. I think I'd need to just not have a job and just be paid to do it, and then I could maybe, because there's so much.
Look, when we grow our YouTubes to that gazillion views and we become like these mongrels who just thrive on having podcasts, then maybe yes. But I think at this point, the way that I collect old school Dark Horse era comics is volumes when they release, and only hardcover. I don't even collect softcover ones because I know they get damaged. I want it to be on a practical side where it can like live there. So when I did a couple of videos where I show fans my collections, what I have, all of my comic books that I own are all hardcovers only.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I love that because mine are most of mine are individual issues, but I've got them specifically bagged and boarded. Like as soon as I get them, as soon as they get delivered by a Forbidden Planet, I order from them. So I get like now.
Wait, you guys have Forbidden Planet too?
Yeah. That's why I
nice.
get all my comics every month. They're the main comic book supply because I haven't. There's 1 or 2 local comic book stores, but I need. With the Forbidden Planet, I just get them delivered. And it's just I've always been kind of ordering with them and stuff. So I get them, and every month now it's like 8 or 9 comics from them. Just this, I get the one email, and it's like subscriptions a couple months ago, and I forget about it, and then I get an email. These have been dispatched, and I get them, and I don't pay for them to bag and board. I do it myself. So it's a nice little ritual where I get my new comics, and then in the evening I'm like, yes, and I take them all out, look at them,
exactly,
slide them in, and lovely.
When you said the ritual, you remind me of my 13 plus years of like managing a local comic book store where we had to bag and board them every Wednesday. So believe it or not, I did collect all the new Marvel run of comic books of Star Wars from 2015 through, I believe, 2017. I still have all my individual issues of all the original Vader, Afro run. But at one point, I was disillusioned with the new Marvel comics, and I had a period where I was like appreciating it from kind of far, like maybe later. There was a point where I was like, these guys don't understand what they're doing. Like, I'm gonna hit pause on this. There were always miniseries, what I liked here and there, but like, let me come back a little bit and support a little of the Dark Horse era stuff that I like. And I also went to Forbidden Planet here in Manhattan and picked up books maybe 4 or 5 years ago in hardcover, like original Thrawn trilogy, which seems like it's out of print now. They're going for $500-600. I'm like, oh, I guess I lucked out. I picked up on time. Like, okay, I'll hold on to those.
Well, it's funny what you say with the comics though as well, because I actually did fall out of the Marvel Star Wars comics a little bit as well, and it's annoying looking back on it because now my collection is like almost all of it is individual issues, but there's a few trade paperbacks. There's the softish cover, but the collections and volumes. And the annoying thing is that with the Afra stuff 2016, I collected from there, and Star Wars was on issue 34 at that point. So I've got from issue 34 of Star Wars up to the run finishes at 75, but I stopped around 60ish, and then I managed to just get up to like 65. But then the last two, I just got the volumes again. And there were just a few Star Wars comics, because before I started the podcast, but after I'd already been reading some of the Star Wars comics, I was like, oh, Dr. Aphra's great, and this is great, and this is great. But then I wanted to move out and save a bit of money and things, and I was looking at places to save money. And I was like, I don't need to be spending 30-ish pounds a month on all these comics when there was the Age of the Rebellion stuff that was coming out, and they were all just one individual story about like characters from, there was the Rebellion, Resistance, and Republic ones.
Side stories, really.
Yeah, and a couple of them are really cool. I love the Qui-Gon one. There's a couple that are really, really good. The Grievous one's really interesting. But the problem is there's a couple, but a lot of them are just okay. You just read it and you go, this didn't add anything to the character. You know, especially with the Anakin Skywalker one. It's like, I don't need a one-shot comic about Anakin. You've got, 6 movies about him, basically, and all of the Clone Wars, which is basically about him, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan. So I don't need a 30-page story that's just self-contained, because there can't be any proper repercussions of it. It can't have any massive effects. When it's the smaller characters that don't get much time, like almost Count Dooku in some ways. I know he got quite a lot in the Clone Wars and then Dooku Jedi Lost, but seeing more about him because I'm intrigued. But I would have loved one on like the side characters, like Asajj Ventress, but she was in like one tiny short story, and it was, and so I was just like, and the main run of Star Wars is getting a bit stale for me. And I was enjoying Afra, so I think I continued with that, but then I trailed off that at one point as well. I was constantly collecting all the Vader ones.
Yeah.
And then when I started the channel, the podcast, I was like, okay, well, I've got almost every canon comic, I might as well just buy the rest. So that's where my collection is.
Yeah.
Well, we are getting near the end here now, because we've been nattering on for, off record 2 hours, on record just under. So are there any final thoughts you want to just tackle before we sort of wrap up? Obviously, I'll let you do all your plugs and things, but is there any sort of final words before we get into the full outro?
No, look, there's a couple of things I want to say. First of all, thank you for having me. It was tons of fun. I delight in talking to you every time. First of all, you're so casual about it, and you seem to have a way being a good host and conversating with people. Even when I interview you, you're so casual about it, and there's this constant and fluid exchange of ideas that I just love. I think that's something that Star Wars fandom could use a little bit more of.
Thank you.
Hearing the other side, right? And I think both and I are focused on the things that really matter. It's celebrate what you love about Star Wars, right? And there's always things that you could put aside if you don't enjoy, and never say no to something, right? Because you might gain a new perspective and you might change and come around. I mean, there's such a miraculous thing of talking to a Star Wars fan who admits to you that, look, at first I looked at The Last Jedi and I hated it, and sort of I looked at it with these new eyes a year later or so, and now I love it. Or even if you still say I don't love it, tell me why. It's it should be a point of interest, not something a tool used to lash out on different fans, right? Mm-hmm. We could all come together and talk about it. And I think that's what makes the franchise interesting. That's what makes the fandom interesting, is when you have all of these little orbits right? The fans that come with their own different world views and perspectives, and all get to participate and say, well, I thought the Clone Wars was the height of, the Star Wars because it did this, or I like this character over here, or I like this comic book artist over there. And it's an exchange of ideas. That's what Star Wars should be. It should never be about, well, let me explain to you why this movie did A, B, and C, and there's a rational reason why this doesn't work, and why my childhood is now ruined. Like, it's like, move aside with this stuff, right? It's like, who are you talking to? We're all adults here, right? We all have a perspective, and it's like, the only person you're convincing with this type of language is yourself. That's not the point. That's the reason that I started my channel. That's the reason I see a lot of stuff in you, the podcast that I get to check out. I sat down and I listened, I'll be honest with you, from start to finish. It's for somebody who creates content all day long. I'll be honest with you, I'm the kind of asshole who doesn't dedicate enough time to listening to other fans' podcasts like yours. But the one that I just clicked on as I was working on my own graphic and listening from start to finish is you and Paul Villanelli's chat about his comic book run. And it came full circle. When I just finished reading all of these comic books, I'm like, oh, shoot. I know what Mike was talking about. It's like, because you were kind of like encouraged, like, hey, Ben, check out all these comic books. We're going to talk about them. Paul Villanelli, and you're throwing his name around, and I'm reading the books. I'm like, wait, but I already know this guy from the previous book, the Jedi Fallen Order, that I already read. I know this guy. I love him. I'm excited about the Marvel comic books again. So all of it comes full circle. That's the point of being a Star Wars fan.
Yeah, I agree. And as you've put it amicably, there are many, many flaws in Star Wars. That's just with the characters, with certain films. You and I both have different views on certain elements of Star Wars, but, the prequels are heavily, heavily flawed movies, but I still love them, and I think they have some of the coolest moments in Star Wars in them. The sequels I think have some incredible moments as well. I also think they are heavily, heavily flawed, but in very, very different ways to the prequels, in almost opposite ways to the prequels. But that doesn't mean that people can't enjoy them. And one of the things I love about your show, and one of the reasons I encourage anyone listening to go check out your show, is just you have the same sort of. You and I have the similar mindsets, which is we're passionate, we want to talk about people who are passionate, and you don't have to necessarily be positive in the sense of everything about Star Wars is good, but you have to be able to be constructive with your criticism about it and respectful of other people's opinions and be open to things and be open to potentially having your mind changed. You don't have to change your mind on everything, but be receptive to that idea. And when you meet content creators who are like that, it just means that conversations with yourself, like I love chatting with you as well. It's so easy and so fun and enjoyable. And when you have someone who is so open like you are and open with your opinion and your readiness to accept someone else's, it makes it so much easier as both a listener but also someone who is involved in the show and speaking with you to have that interaction. So I want to thank you as well for assisting with that kind of environment that I sort of love.
It's always a pleasure. I'm telling you, the moment that I saw your content and the moment that you came over, we started doing a podcast, I knew there's this sort of kind of like a mature, seasoned mentality that I'm encountering, and that's the excitement. It's like, oh, let me start. And when you meet a new person and you say, hi, my name is Ben, and you start interacting, it's almost like you're chiseling a new sculpture out of like a piece of rock, and like you start finding out who that person is. And the more I talk to you, the more I realize like you also have this kind of like settled, more mature look that I think comes with years. Like when you're in your 20s, you're more of have a maximalist kind of like approach, and everything is between two extreme. Everything is either complete shit or everything is like, oh, Mazeballs, this movie was the greatest movie I've ever seen. That's the younger man's territory. Yeah. Like when you're in you're 29, I'm like, I hit 40 this year. You become like more comfortable with yourself. Because I was there too. I used to be one of these guys like, prequels are shit, man. It's like, I hate them. When you're in your 20s and then like you settle down, like, oh, okay, peace out, man. Let's not take all of everything that people say literally and just like absorb it all. And you know what's funny? When you don't get intimidated by other people and don't cave into bickering and insults, and you still talk to people, they generally come around. Yeah. They're like, oh, like just today, like on the same thing, he wrote a whole article about why this movie is bad. And I said, well, it's a matter of perspective. And I explained why. He was like, you know what? I respect you. I'm like, mission accomplished.
Amazing. Well, we'll get you to do your plugs and things. As I said, it's always delightful to speak with you. And I will confess, like, I've listened to a fair amount of your episodes, but I haven't listened to all of them. I don't expect you to listen to all of mine, or anyone for that matter, because there's a ton of great content out there for people to sink your teeth into. And when you are a content creator, such as yourself or myself, you put so much time and energy into creating content.
Yeah.
There's only a certain amount of time one has to actually be able to listen to other things. You know, I have to try and I have to withdraw from listening to Joe Rogan podcasts too much, because they're 3 hours long, and I can listen to like 3 or 4 sort of smaller podcasters' conversations that are equally as interesting than this massive behemoth podcaster. So I know there's loads of things, and obviously, you know, I love music and movies and stuff. There's just not enough time for it all. So you never need to apologize for not listening to. If you never listened or consumed any of my content again, it would be fine, because we're friends and I love chatting with you anyway. But please tell people where they can find you. I'll put links in the description to Twitter and Instagram and stuff. But one more time, tell people where they can find you, what you're all about, and we will hang up this call.
Sure. Guys, if you want to check out my Star Wars group, it's Star Wars Timeline, where we try to have a discourse and try not to be the Zuckerbergs of Facebook of Star Wars and police every word. We encourage people to have a debate, a conversation, so long as you do it respectfully. If you want a Star Wars face group that's not toxic, Star Wars Timeline. My Twitter, I basically just throw shit on it. SWT_channel is where I just like, oh, what is this YouTube thing? I don't even take it seriously. And of course, the main page is on YouTube, Star Wars Timeline. Guys, come over and check out me talking to this guy who invites me over to his podcast. I'm telling you, just sincerely, there's a difference between people who join tribes or cults, or a yes men, and they rally behind a point or idea because they want to stand up with the crown and wave their fists. And there's a group of people who sit down at the right table and enjoy each other's company. Mike, I'm telling you, like, from the first podcast, like, I'm enjoying talking to this dude. Like, I would never thought about 3 or even 4 years ago that I would ever speak extensively about prequels and have fun doing so. We are living, like my boy Josh says at Star Wars on High. Here's another wonderful, wonderful YouTube channel who's also very level-headed like you and I. If we get to do it 3-way someday, it will be wonderful. But it's like you come in to somebody and you talk about prequels in such a way. I swear to you, like after I turn off, I'm like, I think I'm gonna go watch episode 1 now. Like it makes you excited for this thing all over again. It reminds you that we're living in the best year of Star Wars that has ever been. Book of Boba Fett is coming out next year. We're getting the Bad Batch season 2. We're getting Kenobi. There's so much content coming out, guys. Celebrate it, enjoy it. Don't be at each other's throats.
Yep. And if you don't like the new stuff, they're re-releasing all the Legend stuff with really nice, beautiful artwork, incredible sets. I think if I ever won the lottery or something, I would just have a huge collection because they're so beautiful. It's even like Shatterpoint. I've been listening to that on Audible. I don't need to buy it. And it's quite an intense novel. I don't want to reread it again anytime soon. But that cover, it's so good. The artwork.
Beautiful, man.
And the whole, I might have to buy the Darth Bane ones. I might have to convince myself to just invent more time, invent another day of the week. I'll magically make that happen just for Star Wars reading. That'll be it. But yeah, delightful chatting with you as always, Ben. I really appreciate it. I'll include links in the description to everything, including our many conversations as well that we've had on your channel. And I'm sure we'll have many more podcasts to come. So I'll stop the recording here. So thanks again, Ben. I appreciate it.
Take care, guys. Cheers, and thanks for having me on.
Cheers.
No, wait. Hold on. Let me access the method acting. And do correct me because I want to get it right, because there's a very pronounced way of doing it that sounds cartoonish almost, and there's like, cheers. Is that close? Because in Russia, they did teach us the proper English accent, and I lost it when I moved to America. We didn't say further, we said farther.
Yeah.
Right? Or America, it's champion is champion.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there's no right English way. I mean,
because they're dialects, right?
Well, yeah, because it's basically like in America, where you've got relatively every state has its own slight variation, or some states major variations on how they speak American English. And in England, although our continent is substantially smaller, we have like a fifth of the population of a fifth of the population of the whole of America. So it's like we've got that in a much smaller space. So you only travel 2 hours north, and the accents are completely different. So it's similar things. You just go down to Cornwall, that's only 3 hours away from me, but everyone's got a different accent to me.
Can you say it like in your casual tone?
What? Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. When I say things too frequently,
Cheers.
like I can't say like push and pull. My friends mock me because I don't say pull properly, because it sounds like I'm saying PLL. I'm missing out the U. Pull instead of pulling it. But,
pulling it.
Yeah, so weirdness with language. But you're getting better with your cheers. You're getting there.
Someday.
You'll be there one day.
It honestly felt like I'm looking at the time like no way 2 hours have passed. I felt we're like in the middle of it.
Yeah, I know. I was like, has it been 2 hours already? I felt it's only been 45 minutes. But this is where I'll stop the recording. So thank you again, Ben.